Hi Parmesh, thank you for being part of Project Bolo. When and where were you born? And where were you educated?
So I was born in Bombay and I've lived in different parts of the world. I spent some years of school in the Middle East. I studied in the US for a few years as well. Wherever I am in the world, whether I'm traveling or living somewhere else, I still identify very much with the city. So I think of myself very much a Bombay person. It was a very simple middle class Sindhi household in Kolaba.
Being brought up in different cultures and cities, how has it shaped you as a person?
I think I've been quite blessed in having the opportunity to embark on this quite wonderful learning journey, whether it was in growing up in different parts of the world, whether it was in having the opportunity to study in not just in the US but at a place like MIT, which was this incredibly amazing, humbling journey more than anything else, because you grew up in India and in Bombay and you think that you're kind of smart and whatever. But then you go to a place like MIT and take class at Harvard when you realize just how stupid you are, and how there are people who are so much smarter than you and so much more humbler than you, and how there are people who are actually not just thinking of but very actively working and making the world a better place, however simple that might sound, whether it's through academia, whether it's through actual research or on the ground projects, whether it's through building links to connect to other people. So I feel very blessed, and certainly it's the travel and has impacted my life and my outlook on life, and really shaped me into the kind of person I've become.
How and when did you start exploring your sexuality or come to terms with it?
I find it very hard to answer that question because I don't know if people, it's and I suppose different people have different, responses to when did you first know. In my case, I suppose I always knew, but it was a process of articulation more than discovery. So I had to say it, I had to say it to myself and articulate it. And I think that process began in school, but as I've written about in my book, it took a couple of years after that, including college and working in Bombay. But for me, doing research within the community and working on this book was the biggest, not just learning process, but it was also a way of acknowledging a whole bunch of things, of immersing myself within the community or within the several communities that exist.
Tell me more about your first crush.
I had a very good friend in school, and which was actually my first relationship. So in that sense, we discovered it organically and through each other. And we had when I now look back, was my first relationship. But it wasn't something that either of us knew about. It was something just, I think, very innocently and very sweetly happened, whether it was the emotional aspect of it and certainly the physical aspect of it. We stumbled upon it and we were like, this is really good. It was only years later when one began to have a language for this, that you realize, oh, so all that stuff, maybe that meant, that one is gay. But at that time, it was just, I think it was quite organic. In terms of the process, I think when I was in Bombay, when I was just out of college, and I was, and this is an interesting story because it was, so I joined Elle, the French fashion magazine, and I was in this process of finding out. So one of my first story ideas to my editor, I went to her and I was like, I think we should do a big feature on the gay scene in India. And I think many people realize this, but until you come, everyone else knows except you yourself. So everyone kind of knew, but I was living in this fool's paradise that nobody knew. So she smiled and she's like, why would you want to do that? I was like, well, I think it'd be an interesting article for a magazine, and I want to do this story. So she was like, okay, go do the story, go find out what exists. So then in my mind I had an excuse. So so I used the fact that I was actually doing a newspaper story to go and meet people like Ashok Rao Kavi, to go and meet people like Corey Walia, to go and meet. I mean, that was also my journey of finding out who these again, right? In the late, this was in the mid 90s. And even in the mid 90s, there were very few people that you could, that were not just out, but that were comfortable talking about their sexuality. And one of the people I met during the course of, is there a gay scene? What is it? And understanding the history of it was Riyad Wadia, the documentary filmmaker, who then actually became quite a big influence in my life. In fact, my book is dedicated to his memory. And I remember very clearly because he was actually the first person who was extremely confident about his sexuality and made no apologies about it. And I was in my Xavier's class, and he had come to take a guest lecture, and he came walking in wearing this tight pink t-shirt with his shiny glasses on his head, and he was like, I'm going to show you all a gay film, if anyone has a problem, you can leave my class. And I was like, wow, right? So of course, then when I was doing my story, I was like, I have to call Riyad. And so I called Riyad and I went to his house and I was like, I'm doing this, I want to interview you because I'm doing this article. So he just like took one look at me and said, honey, you're a fag, deal with it. I was like, no, what are you saying? He's like, look, chill, it's not that bad. Why don't you stay over for dinner? I have some friends coming home. You can see, no one's going to eat you up. No one's going to, because I was just so afraid at that point. And I was like, okay, but it doesn't mean I'm anything, okay? I'm staying for dinner. And I stayed for dinner, and he had friends who came over, and I realized that it was, it more than just, something that dealt with sexuality. It was, that was my first insight into what it means as a community. So what happened after that was that I was going to the US to research colleges for my master's program. And what Riyad also did is something which I will always be grateful for, is that, he said, look, you should go meet my brother, who incidentally also happens to be gay, and his partner, and stay with them for a few days. And because he said, look, I can see you're one of these boring, homebound, nerdy types, so I don't think the party scene is for you. I think it might be nice because, if you meet my friends or whatever, they'll find you boring. So I think you should meet my brother and, he'll whatever, which was very interesting. So when I went to the US, I went to Roy and Alan's home and stayed with them for a few days. And again, that was very interesting because, they were like any other normal couple. And I was very lucky in the sense that I was exposed to this whole range of things. So it wasn't just this. It could be this or this. It could be this and this. It could be neither, right?
Apart from Riyad and his friends, were there any other queer spaces you discovered?
Well, I think, as I became more and more comfortable with my own sexuality and in thinking about, my sexuality as something that was just beyond sex as well, I made friends, whether it's people's homes, whether it's just hanging out with people, seeing movies. That was very interesting to do in Bombay. But actually the first time I discovered, say, a more organized space in Bombay was, it just happened to be 2 weeks before I was leaving India for the first time. Before I was leaving India for my, to go to the US for my master's coursework. And it was very strange because just 2 weeks before, I happened to go to my, actually a few weeks before, I happened to go to a gay Bombay dance party as well as to Humsafar for a mujra. And for the first time, I went to both these things. And incidentally, I think a couple of weeks before that, I went for the screening of Gulabi Aina as well, which was for me, it was an amazing insight into a very different but parallel queer scene that was also happening. So it was amazing, and for me, it was also especially surprising that just as I was ready to leave India. So my, writing my book was, in my sense, a rediscovery of, of myself, of the gay scene, of the community, and, and a re-looking of Bombay through a very different lens. So,
how different or same is the community organizing in India as compared to the communities in Boston, New York, or other cities you've been to?
No, I think the community organizing is pretty much the same. I think, again, so when I went to Boston, I found the gay scene there to be, it was it was liberating in one sense, but also alienating because I didn't find people like me or stories like mine. And then I discovered, say, the masala or the South Asian scene, and that was interesting because there were people who, in a sense, had not similar, but there were narratives that I could relate to. But I realized soon enough that Indianness, like gayness, like all these other things, is not something you can wash away from your skin, no matter what soap you use, even if it's foreign soap. Like, I don't know if you read Bhupen Kakar has an amazing story called Foreign Soap. It's not something that is washed away from your skin. It's part of you. So I realized that I began to acknowledge and revel in it. And then I realized that what I had been looking for all this while were narratives that I could relate to in my own context. But I think given the nature of what one is fighting for, I think the LBGT community in India, and I'm including the larger South Asian and global gay community in it, is actually pretty unified, pretty together, and has agreed that the basic things are all the same. One is fighting for the same basic things. Now, what one, can it do better? Yes. One of the ways that I think it could do better is for people who are successful from this community, like to build institutions that will last. So whether it's faith-based communities, whether it's religion-based communities, whether it's LBGT or communities in other parts of the world, they've all built centers, institutions, scholarships, grants. They've facilitated history being documented and contextualized, and they facilitated this kind of institution building. So I think this is something that the LBGT community in India and the larger thing really needs to focus a lot on. So I've decided in my own small way to start like some kind of small research scholarship for anyone who wants to study what it means to be queer in an Indian context, LBG or T. And I'm going to do this with the Humsafar Trust, and we're going to establish this thing, and where every year we give a grant to, which will be an applied based research grant. Now this is one step, right? There's like several more that need to be done, right? What about local languages, right? A large part of India still doesn't speak English. How do we create languages around, or words, or a grammar of sexuality for what is now in this India Bharat divide? Lots is happening in India. What is happening in Bharat? I mean, it's understudied, it's underserved, and it needs intervention the most. So if at all I have a small grouse with the LBGT community, it is that it is not doing enough for building institutions for its own people. And I think this is something that we might really pay for in the long run. And so, I really hope that we do.
Okay, the big question. When did you come out to your family? Do you have conversations with your mother and father about your sexuality?
When I came out to my mom, which was pretty late, which was in my early 20s, I was still in Bombay, I hadn't gone, and it was, I was just, starting to see my first boyfriend. And I said, oh, there's something I want to tell you, the whole whatever. And she's like, what? Why are you so nervous? I was like, well, I think I'm gay. And she's like, do you think, or are you sure? I was like, okay, I'm sure I'm gay. She's like, okay, what do you want for dinner? And I was like, what? That's not the answer. She's like, yeah, I mean, what do you want to eat for dinner? I was like, but aren't you supposed to react like properly? She's like, no, what's the big deal, right? So it was a complete anticlimax, and in a sense, I felt quite cheated because I was all ready for drama and tears, and I was like, this is it. But my dad made up for that with his own, with his response, and his was, I think, the typical, or if there is such a thing. But no, he wasn't very accepting initially. I don't think he's accepting right now.
Do you have conversations with your mother and father about your sexuality?
Not with my father. Not with my father. With my mom, sure. So my dad doesn't know who I'm seeing. My mom my mom has to know who I'm seeing. And I want to. In that sense, I'm quite, heteronormative in a complete Indian spoiled son way. I'm a mama's boy in a very, Indian men are completely spoiled by their mothers, I think, gay and straight, and I'm one of those. I'm very typical in that sense.
All right, okay. Would you like to talk about your relationships?
Well, yeah, the first one was very special, and it was, so there have been two, and that's about it. At 34, there go all your stats about gay men out of the window, right? I bring them, I bring them down. uh, they were both very special in different ways. I think the first one taught me about the possibility of love, about what it entails, and it was wonderful. The second one was I suppose the defining relationship of my life, and it went on for we were together for about 3.5 years, and we met at MIT, and we started living together. He happens to be Japanese, so it was a cross-cultural relationship. And it was wonderful. And what I remember now, I mean, now that it's over, are not the highs or the lows, or every relationship goes through moments of amazing joy and irritating moments or whatever, right? But what I remember the most and what I treasure the most are the ordinary moments.
Do you always believe in relationships, or you think being single is okay?
I think people can be single and be happy, but I also think that people inherently want gravitate towards intimacy. I mean, human beings, we crave intimacy, we crave affection, we crave, however problematic and difficult and time consuming and irritating it is, we crave love. And so and I think even the most happiest of single people, if you see them after a few years, they've decided to get committed, and then then they hate it, and then they're like, oh man, it's better being single.
And would you like to have a child?
I want a child. I mean, I want ever since I can remember. I think ever since I was 11 or 12, I've wanted to have children. I think I'll be a very good father. At some point in the future, I would love to have and raise my own children, hopefully with a partner. Again, it's I don't know where I'll be in the world and what I'll be doing, but and I'm 34, so I do want to run around with them and be around to watch them grow up. So I better do this in the next couple of years if I'm but certainly, and until then, what I do is since a lot of my friends have now reached the age where they are having their own kids, I become like the cool uncle. So I have friends whose kids I take out, and so I become a parent on and they love it. They're like, great, you like children, take ours on weekends. Since they know I love kids so much, they include me in their families. So I must be the only 34-year-old uncle who gets called for 4-year-old birthday parties. So there's a bunch of 4-year-olds, and then there's Parmesh uncle, right? Even if it's midweek, they said, well, you must come because there's cake and there's this and there's that, right? So we get, in that sense, we are, we create these networks around ourselves to have these intimate spaces. So I think you can have a wonderfully fulfilling life as a gay person. The only thing that limits you is your own imagination, because again, if everything is a construct, right? I mean, what is this, and what does it mean to be Indian? What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be gay? All these are constructs. These are imagined constructs. And so if we can have all these imagined constructs, then certainly we can have an imagined construct of what it means to be a happy, confident, successful, fulfilled gay person as well, right? So I think it's within the realm of imagination that these dreams come about, and then we articulate them, and then we make them actual physical reality. So I think there are people in India having very, very fulfilling lives as gay people.
Do you think it's important for everyone to come out?
I don't think not being out is a problem. Do I want more people to be comfortable with who they are? Of course. Would I be happy if more people came out and it was just a non-issue, or just as it's been in my very privileged life? Yes. Do I think it will happen? Yes. I think it's bound to happen, as it's not a yo-yo. This is it's a wave which is moving towards a particular direction, right? So certainly in the longer term, if you look at longer term trends, societies all over the world, including India, are moving towards being more inclusive and accepting of all kinds of diversity. I'm very against absolutes. I mean, that's my problem. I don't like because that's when you become fundamentalist, and there are LBGT fundamentalists as well, right? We know of them. So
But I don't know too many gay corporate honchos. Where are they?
you should go out more.
I mean, I don't know many of them who are out.
They are, but it's a different. I mean, they are everywhere. I mean, that's the thing. There's gay politicians. Gay politicians. There's gay. There's there's gay people everywhere. There's. I think one has to. It's also you have to look differently. It's ways of looking, and I think we need to reframe the way we look at each other.
Okay, tell me, how is it being a quote unquote corporate gay man?
Actually, all of my working life, that I won't be treated any differently than anyone else because of anything. Certainly not because of my sexuality. So whether it was at the Times, whether it was at Mahindra. In fact, one of the first questions when I was having a conversation with Anand in Boston, when he first said you should come back to India and enough of this think tank stuff you're doing in Boston. He said come back to India and start doing. So it's like okay, but he's like so come work with the company. And I was like, so one of the first question I asked him was I was like, so does your company have a same-sex spousal benefit policy? And he was like, no, but we can create it for you because we really don't want we don't want to treat you any differently than anyone else. And that to me was important. The fact, and this is pre-377 and all of that, right? But to me it was very important that the head of the company that I'm going to work with acknowledges me and doesn't want to treat me any differently. So I mean, I've made it very clear that I'm not going to work within a space which is discriminatory in any way. So earlier when I was at Mahindra, I was in a relationship. So my desk had a photo of me and my spouse on it, just like my boss's desk has a photo of him and his wife on it. It wasn't that my photo wasn't kept face down, it was kept face up facing the world. And so it was like people would say, who is this? I wouldn't say this is my friend, I would say this is my partner. What is that? Boyfriend? And then it was like, oh, and that was that. So I've never really been, so I don't know, I mean, I'm sure people talk about it, but maybe they talk out behind my back. They certainly don't talk about it to my face.
You being out at work, has it enabled any colleagues to approach you for advice or support?
I'm in that sense not typical because people also know me because of the book, so I often get emails because of that. Some anonymous, some not. Certainly, I think people are more comfortable with discussing things with you. But the contrary might also happen, that because I might be so out that people might be afraid that if they discuss things with me, I might out them, and that's not the case, right? I mean, I don't think one has to be out. I'm far from it. I think people should have the right to represent themselves in exactly the way they want to, and nobody should pressurize them in any way to be anything other than who they want to. Whether it's with one's sexuality or with anything else, right? I mean, one's own identity is in any sense a construct, but I mean, one decides what one wants to, right?
Internet is being used so widely now. How do you see the use of internet as a tool of activism?
So earlier with the internet, the concept was about stickiness, that you have to be on a site for long. But now with social media, at least with Twitter, with Facebook and all, it's all about spreadability. That you post an update and it goes out in the world, people forward it, soon everyone knows. And so I think a combination of physical as well as online can do wonders. So right, if you're a corporation which is making an amazing change, say, to an HR policy by being diverse, people will know. Young people who are joining up your organization will search it. Today, young people want to, there's one school of thought that says young people are all about, they're about chasing fast cars and sexiness, this Axe generation, right? You put this deodorant and then hot people will come to you, right? There's another school that believes that young people are actually very conscious. They care about the earth. They care about their set of values. Before doing anything, they research. Before they buy a mobile, they go online and compare. Before they join a company, they go and see what are people talking about it. And so if a company does a positive HR policy where they say we are not discriminating against anyone, including on sexual orientation grounds. So again, but again, I don't want to seem like one of those fuddy-duddy people who navigated relationships online as well through Skype, for example, and they've been meaningful in their own ways. So I mean, so don't get me wrong, I'm not saying physical or offline is more important than online. All I'm saying is that they are different and they need to be used differently. That's all. So I mean, again, I think every technology in that sense has immense possibilities. How you use it depends on a whole bunch of things. The point to remember here is that the same tools which are used to do a certain kind of activism can also be used against you. So just as enough people are using, mobiles and websites to spread, for example, the cause for gay marriage, there are enough people opposing it or using the same tools to oppose it. So which is why I think it's very important that one has to, it's a combination of online tools as well as physical on the ground activities.
Look, there's also the danger of internet putting people back into the closet. Many youngsters say that through the internet they can find a relationship, go to parties and picnics, and feel quite safe. So they feel there's no need to come out.
I said when you come out, that it changes the equation, because if you become a physical body, then it's an embodiment, and that embodiment is important because that embodiment of a queer person brings reality into sharp focus for people all around, right? It's not an abstract concept, and so which is why, I mean, it's so important to come out. Again, at the same time, we also see people who take jobs and who, groups of 3 or 4 people stay together and lead, and they might be out to their parents and they might be staying with their friends, and they lead they lead what you might call a gay life or a gay lifestyle, certainly. We also see people who do come out in their families and at their workplaces. We certainly see parents which are accepting. We certainly see workplaces which are becoming more accepting. So I think it's again, it's a process, and in that process, I think it's not everyone will flow, or not everyone will swim in the same direction. It's okay if people are swimming the other way around as well. I mean, that's the point. I think people have to figure out what makes. Ultimately, you go to bed with yourself, no? And when you go to bed with yourself, I mean, you live with your own morality, your own values, your own sense of justice, right and wrong, conscience, whatever you call it, your own mind.
What are the changes you see around you currently, especially about openness to sexuality?
I've seen changes which are, I've seen complex changes. So at one level, I'm seeing a great amount of positivity, right? I'm seeing, and say within one's own example as well, I've written about this in my book as well. And India, more than any other place, surprises you in unexpected ways, both positively and negatively. It's not to say that discrimination is not happening. It certainly is. Families are also not welcoming. People are also fired from their jobs or whatever, and there's lots of work to be done on the ground. But I always like to focus on, I think one must focus on the good and on the positive, because that generates momentum that takes you ahead in the future.
Parmesh, you are a TED fellow. How do you use this position to affect change?
So I'm a TED India fellow, and I was chosen as that when TED happened in India for the first time. They chose me for this fellowship because of the book and because of other things. So it was a great space. I met other fellows from all over the world who are all doing amazing things to change, India and the world. And that made me very interested in hosting TEDx's. So I co-hosted TEDx Mumbai and TEDx Delhi. And I think organically, because I don't think of queerness as something that is distinct. I think it's, there's many things, there's many components, and that just happens, But so organically it comes in. So for example, at TEDx Mumbai, one of the speakers that I really wanted to have speak was Lakshmi. And I believe she's part of this series as well. And it's quite amazing.
Okay, one last question, and very important. What do you want to see in the next 10 years?
World peace. I want world peace. I want sports stadiums for India. I want no nuclear weapons. I want India as a land of the Mahatma, and I believe that all the children who are like little flowers should bloom in a garden of perfect happiness.
And you want a good husband.
And I want a Mr. India crown for saying all this. No, I want to live in interesting times, and I'm very glad that I do live in interesting times. I'm very glad, and actually proud to be part of this movement tangentially, and but I still feel very much part of it. I'm proud that in my own small, stupid way, I'm making a difference. I'm I'm proud to be friends with people like you. I think it's a blessing, no? And it's to do what one wants, to see the possibility of change and help make some of it happen in one's own lifetime. I mean, I think that's such a gift.
Okay. Thank you so much, Parmesh, for being part of Project Bolo.